Set this right here. So tonight I'm resuming a series that was suggested to me back in the COVID years. In 2020, David came up with the idea. The series is called Lost in Translation, and the idea is we look at words that have lost something of their meaning by virtue of their translation from one language to another, the biblical languages to English, or from one culture, one place and time to another, or even one context to another. And I thank David for the idea for this. Back in COVID, when we were practicing social distancing and we weren't gathering, I produced a series of YouTube videos, which you can go watch if you're persistent enough and dig deep into the recesses of the internet. You might find those YouTube videos. And so several years later, David suggested, why don't you resume the series and pick a couple of words for the next couple of days? And I've done that. I want to focus in this series on two words. For tonight, the word death, and for next time, the word resurrection. And a couple of things I'll say just as a prefatory marks. I've always had a little tentative relationship to this series. I've always had a fear that it might tacitly convey something that I don't want it to convey, which is that the scriptures are inaccessible and can only be accessed by experts who might know the languages. I think that couldn't be farther from the truth. I think that the church is well equipped with excellent translations, excellent teachers. Generally speaking, I don't think most people need to know the biblical languages, or that much is lost. That's the title is Lost in Translation. What I don't want you to think is that something essential has been lost unless someone comes up and gives you the secret knowledge. It's not that at all. It's rather just I think of it as an attempt to together explore the most central hopes of our collective faith, explore them more deeply, come to know them and appreciate them more. And it's not so much about knowledge as it is about, as Sean said in his prayer, growing our faith, reminding ourselves of the things that we believe and hope in and have faith in. So I hope that's the true end of this series. Death and resurrection. I think those two words both go to our most central hopes. They go to the gospel. They go to the thing that has drawn us here, that has shaped our lives, that has given us hope. And we're going to look at both sides of, they're opposite sides of the same coin, death and resurrection. Tonight, we look at death. And I want to start by contrasting what I imagine most people hear when they hear the word death, at least in our context, and then contrast that with what I think is a broader biblical notion. So you and I, being Westerners, modern folk, we hear the word death, and we largely apprehend it, because we're Westerners, in individualistic and scientific terms. We hear the word death, and we think it signifies, and it does, we think it signifies the moment when each of us die, what happens to us when our life is over. And we think of it in terms of life, stopping. The heart ceases to beat. And of course, the Bible does use the word death in that way, to talk about the end of an individual life. But in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, death is a broader concept than just that. And you'll find the word used in a much broader sense, and that's the sense I want to talk about tonight. And I'll begin by completely plagiarizing my mentor. I walked into a freshman class when I was doing my doctoral studies, a freshman biblical intro class, and my mentor, Dr. Charles Talbert, I love the man, he's passed away, a man of great faith, a towering scholarly figure, but more importantly, a person of just deep, deep faith. A father doctor to me in every sense. I couldn't have had a better mentor. He taught these young Baylor's students on the first day of class about death, because the biblical story, in a sense, begins with creation and then, as Paul says, death's entrance into the world. Here is the way Dr. Talbert defined death. He said, and I'll start with my own little meager definition, and then we'll turn to his better definition. The way I would define death, in its broadest sense, is that it's a power that reigns over everything. It's a power that enters the world and reigns over everything. And when does it enter the world in our biblical story? At what point does death come into the world? The fall. Adam's sin. That's what Paul says in Romans 5. But of course, he's just repeating what's said 1,000 different ways before him. Dr. Talbert describes death entering into the fall, into the world at the fall in this way. He says it is a power that affects 4 different relationships, and it corrupts each one, and it undermines each one. And so in some sense, the gospel is the repairing of these 4 relationships. Here are the 4 relationships. 1, the individual's relationship to themselves. You and I experience death's reign in our bodies when we are sick, when we ache, when we have a cold. We experience it when we encounter mental anguish, grief. We experience it when we encounter mental illness or personality disorders. So death is not just something that happens to us when we finally die. It's already a power that's affecting us. Every cell in your body is dying right now. That's death. We know that there will come a time when we cease to live. That's death. But it's all that's broken within me as an individual. That's the power of death reigning in this world as far as it affects my relationship to myself. The second relationship, the individual's relationship to others. It's when Adam sins, death is the consequence, right? It's not just, though, that he's going to eventually die. That's not the only fruit of his sin. What are some other fruits of his sin that go beyond just himself? Selfishness. Brother kills brother, right? Cain kills Abel. You're getting to the 4th relationship. She's already anticipated it. Once you start reflecting on the story of Adam, you begin to see what death is, right? It's not just that Adam's going to die. It's that already he experiences shame within himself. Already there's something about him. There's guilt within him. That's the self. But also human relationships are changed. You began to see human relationships being broken. You see man come to dominate woman. You see brother kill brother. You see, so all disorder that we see in our own lives and in the lives around us between humans, between brother and sister, father and mother, husband and wife, or broader, between clan and clan, or between nation and nation. Nations go to war against nations. Those things didn't exist in creation as God made it. Those things are the product of what Paul calls death entering the world with Adam's sin. So my relationship to myself, our relationship to others. The third relationship that changes once death begins to reign is the individual's relationship to the physical cosmos, to the creation, the physical creation, the environment, whatever you want to call it. How does the world itself, the physical world, change in the Adam story? There's several ways. There are several things you could point to once death enters the world. I'm sorry? So before the fall, before Adam's sin, humanity has this wonderful relationship to the garden. It's a bounty. There's no work. There's no work in the toiling sense, right? Yes, humanity shares in God's dominion over creation and tending the garden. But before the fall, there's not this toil, this labor that's painful. Afterward, humanity's relationship to the physical earth that gives its food has changed. Work, labor. What were you going to say, Dale? Dale says the ground is cursed. And in Hebrew, the word can be translated ground or earth. Cursed is the eretz because of you. Cursed is the earth because of you. The earth comes under a curse. The Hebrews use the word death to describe that kind of corruption that comes to the physical cosmos. It's not a place of death before Adam's sin, but it becomes a place of death after Adam's sin. How else do we see this manifesting itself? Man ages and dies. Is humanity the only thing that ages and dies? Well, we do know about what was eaten and what wasn't eaten before creation, right? There was no death in the sense that animals did not kill. Humans were vegetarian. They ate just the fruit of the earth. But after the fall, now death becomes a means of sustenance. Now there is... What's that now? I think there will be brisket trees in the age to come. I've not given up that hope. I've not given up that hope. That's right. Any other signs that the physical creation has changed?
It's almost in chaos. Returns. The weather, the ground, rather than being in harmony, stills the sea. The weather becomes chaotic. In some sense, chaotic.
I think that's right. I don't know if you could hear David. David said, chaos returns. And everything becomes chaotic. That's right. There's not death in the world until Adam's sin. And I think this is really important as Christians when we reflect on natural disaster, when we reflect on tsunamis that kill 20,000 and 30,000 people, when we reflect on earthquakes that, produce just untold death in cities. I think it's important for us to say this is creation in a state of disarray, not in a state of order. It's creation in a state of decay, of disorder, not in a state of order. This is not creation as God made it. It's creation in its broken state. The Hebrew people would not have been surprised that modern science can look as far as it can into a telescope and see death everywhere. Every star, every galaxy we look at, even the universe itself we know to be dying. And then you turn it the other way around, look at a microscope as far as you can go in terms of small vision. You see nothing but death. Every cell is dying. The Hebrews would say this is a state of corruption, of death entering the world. And there's a sense in which it is the entire creation is not as it should have been, or not as it should be and will be. I saw some hands peripherally. David.
Paul says the creation is groaning. What does that word mean?
David's question is when Paul says creation is groaning, what is the word? Our English word groaning is a pretty good translation. The nuance that might be lost is in Greek it's the word that's often used for the groaning that a woman has in child labor, in childbirth. And I think it's the passage your mind immediately went to is a wonderful example. In Romans, Paul has this notion that not only do we groan as we await the renewal of all things, we Christians, but God's Spirit groans. God within us groans like a woman in childbirth. We groan like a woman in childbirth. God groans like a woman in childbirth. And creation itself, the physical creation itself, groans. I actually wanted to end on that passage, not far from it, a section right close to it. So it's kind of ironic. I wasn't going to go to the groaning section, but the groaning section I think is really poignant. And the idea there is that God is groaning with us in the midst of this state of decay as we await the renewal of all things. And his groaning is intercessory prayer. God's Spirit's groaning is expressed in intercessory prayer. But that's God joining us and creation in a state of groaning. And I think it's really important to grasp that notion of the woman in childbirth, because that's a pain, but it's also a hopeful pain, right? It points to life that's coming. Yeah, Kenneth? I think that's fair. Yeah, and ancient early Christians commonly would use feminine metaphors to describe the Spirit's work, and Paul does, with the groaning image. So, with Adam's sin, we have these three relationships. The fourth relationship, as was mentioned a moment ago, is our relationship to God. And how do we see that in the Adam story? How do we see that relationship being broke? We already had shame mentioned, which is humans experience shame between themselves and God. How else is the relationship between humanity and God broken, corrupted with Adam's sin? Kicked out of the garden. And what's the consequence of being kicked out of Eden? Consequences. That's a bad question. There are multiple consequences. No longer access to the tree of life. So being separate from God is essentially our own death. But it's also just the loss of access to God in a personal kind of way. We can say that everything that God has done since then has been moving toward us after we moved away from Him. That God intended a good creation, a creation that was perfect in every way, and God intended to walk and talk among us. And our sin, not only walk and talk, He invited us to share in His good dominion of creation. He made us in His image to join Him in having dominion over the earth and its creatures. And so our sin affects not just us, it affects all that we had dominion over, is the way the Hebrew mind reasons its way through. So all four of those relationships become corrupted. Death makes everything broken. The power of death. It's an impersonal futility, an impersonal corruption, an impersonal power that is operative in the world. And the prophets, when they look to the future and they begin to imagine in their inspired visions the way the world will one day look, it's not surprising that they imagine a world where death is removed, where death is defeated. And in fact, we get our word gospel from Isaiah. For Isaiah, initially the good news is just for Israelites. You're going to be delivered from Babylon. Initially, the gospel's a very narrow message in Isaiah's vision. Good news, you captive Israelites, you're going to be delivered from Babylon. But the gospel expands over the course of Isaiah's career as he continues to imagine. And before long, he's saying, actually, he's not just going to deliver Israelites from Babylon, he's going to deliver Israelites from all the nations. They've been dispersed throughout the world. He's going to bring them all back. That's still just good news for Israel, though. But then Isaiah's vision expands further. He's going to deliver the Israelites, not so much from the nations. He'll send surrogates to do that. He'll deliver the Israelites from the nation's gods. the false gods of this world, the demons, the idols, the starry hosts. That's the real captor. Those are the powers that really hold Israel captive. Once Isaiah makes that move, it becomes good news for all of us. God is promising a new exodus. That's the good news, a new exodus out of captivity to these dark powers that reign in the cosmos. That's another way of talking about death. And then Isaiah also says God will deliver us from death itself. So the good news that Jesus preached of a coming kingdom where a new power reigns, God comes as king, is an answer to the reign of brokenness in this world. Will we talk about it personally in terms of demons and false gods, or whether we talking about it impersonally in terms of the power of death? It's two different powers. One, a parody of the other, a poor parody of the other. So we believe in the good news that God will come and be king and will reign here. We pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth. That's our hope. And that is a prayer for what God will do, that God will come and reign, but it's also the reverse. It's fixing the current broken reign of death in this world. So what I want to do tonight is I wanted to kind of quickly do the Adam piece, and I want to look at the prophet's vision of the world as it may be. And I'm going to start with Isaiah. I don't know how much time we have. I think we'll have time to look at quite a few voices in Scripture. For us to be nourished with these visions of the world as it one day might be, free from the power of death. If you have your Bibles, or if you have a phone with a Bible on it, that's an old guy's way of putting the matter. If you have a phone that has internet access to a Bible, that's probably a more accurate way. Let's turn to Isaiah 25. I want to start with a few passages from Isaiah. And I want to start with a vision of the final feast. This is one of Isaiah's many portraits of the end, of how things will be at the very end of all of history. And what Isaiah is picturing here, it happens to me all the time. I don't have a class at LCU without something like that happening. What Isaiah is picturing here is God as king. When we pray, thy kingdom come, this is a vision of thy kingdom come. This is God as a king. And the scene is a very typical ancient Near Eastern scene. It's put in terms that these ancient Near Eastern people could understand. God is pictured like a king hosting a covenant meal. So in antiquity, in ancient Near Eastern times, when a king comes to power, there's always a meal. And that's a very important thing. It's a ritual. It's a covenant meal, and it's a meal where the king will become king of his subjects, and his subjects are agreeing to serve him. And here God is pictured in that role, an end-time king. And let's read about it together. Let's start, I guess, in verse 6. On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples. Real quick. Isaiah is a Jewish prophet. What does he mean when he says all peoples? No, not the 12 tribes. All peoples. What is it? If I hadn't asked the question that way, what would you have said? All peoples. He means all peoples. He's talking about all nations. All the nations of the world, all peoples. This is kind of remarkable for a Jewish prophet to be saying this. This is not just a feast for us Jews. This is a feast for all the peoples of the world. A feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wines, of rich food filled with marrow, of well-aged wines strained clear. So this is a very luxurious feast. Now, this is poetry, I should also say. It may not seem as much poetry in our English translations, but it's very poetic in the Hebrew. And then you're going to, with this next verse, verse 7, we get some poetic images, some metaphors. And I want to ask you what you think about these, what they're saying. And he will destroy on this mountain the shroud that is cast over all the peoples. What is that an image of? The shroud that is cast over all the peoples. So this is an impossible image, right? It's a shroud, but somehow it's over all the peoples of the earth. What's the image of? I'm sorry? This is what a dead body looks like. This is what death looks like in antiquity. You know, they don't have our embalming techniques. So in antiquity, the moment you die, you're covered in a shroud. A shroud is the burial cloth that covers. Here, it's not an individual covered in a burial cloth. It's all the peoples. What is God doing to that burial shroud? He's destroying it. He will destroy on that mountain the shroud that is cast over all the peoples, the sheet that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever. That's also a metaphor. So not only is God going to be joining all the peoples of the earth in a feast of well-aged wines and rich marrowed meats, the main course of this end-time banquet is death itself. God will devour death. Death will no longer exist in the creation. Notice the result. Then the Lord God will wipe away the tears from all the faces, and the disgrace of his people he will take away from all the earth. Here he does refer to Israel. Israel has sinned. And this is where we can identify with Israel in our own sin. Israel has sinned, has gone into captivity. This is the result of the freedom that God brings them. God takes the tears of not only their sin, but the consequences of their sin away, but also the shame that came with their sin, the disgrace. For the Lord has spoken. It will be said on that day, Lo, this is our God. We have waited on him so that he might save us. This is the Lord for whom we have waited. Let us be glad and rejoice in his salvation. What is salvation from here? It's salvation, above all else, from the power of death. There's so many oracles in Isaiah I'd love to look at. Let me just limit it to two. Let's just turn to Isaiah 11. Isaiah 11. This is a messianic oracle, Isaiah 11. This is an oracle of a descendant of Jesse becoming king of the world. God is not only going to reign as king himself in the prophet's vision, but he will reign in and through his Messiah. That's a hope of many of the prophets. And that Messiah will be a descendant of David, the restored Davidic line. We're talking about, in Christian perspective here, we're talking about Jesus. And chapter 11, 1 through 5, we're not going to read those verses. It describes the future reign of this king, where he conquers the nations. What's interesting is previous prophets had the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, conquering the nations, slaughtering the nations. Isaiah doesn't say that's wrong, but he does say something that's new. He'll conquer the nations with the rod of his mouth. He'll speak and conquer the nations. What I want to focus on is the world that ensues after this king is fully reigning. The world that ensues. And we believe that Jesus is this Messiah, and this is the world that Jesus will eventually bring about. It starts in verse 6. And as we read, again, this is poetry. It's poetic images. It's poetic language. I'll ask y'all, what do you think is being depicted here? When this king reigns, it says in verse 6, the wolf shall live with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the kid. The calf and the lion and fatling together, and the little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put its hand on the adder's den. They will not hurt or destroy on my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Lots of good answers to this question. What's being depicted here? David says a return to Eden. How is it a return to Eden? What is it about this scene that is evoking Eden? No predatory relationships among the animals. What we think of as predator and prey are coexisting peacefully. One doesn't eat the other. What else? What about human relationships to the animals? Yeah. I've chosen resurrection as the word we'll look at next time as the opposite of death. The word I toyed with and almost went with, and it would be just as good, would be shalom or peace. The opposite in many ways in the Hebrew mindset of death is peace. This is a portrait of shalom, a global shalom, where animals exist without death among them. Humans live with, and these are dangerous beasts, some that are pictured here. Notice the image, Isaiah playing with the image of children, just weaned children, helpless toddlers playing over the holes and dens of snakes, unafraid. There's no danger of death. Yes, Kenneth? It's almost an unimaginable world. I think it's appropriate that these visions of the end are cast in poetry. I think they're but dim, distant glimpses of the world as it may be, but they should fill us with hope for a world that's free. A lack of danger and the attendant anxiety. Yes, Dale. The church fathers certainly took this verse and ran in that direction with it. If you think of Eden as and not without justification, right? In Eden, what role did the snakes play? Well, one snake in particular played a pretty devastating role, right? And so, in some ways, this, the ending of the most helpless human in the presence of the most dangerous snakes. For the early church fathers, they saw in this a reversal of human relationship to evil. They would not go to this verse, though, I don't think, for Satan. It would be more he will strike your heel, that verse, because this verse would seem to imply salvation for even the snakes, But yeah. And there's a finality to these visions, right? We saw in 25 the foreverness of God's final removal of death. Here, the language in the final verses, they will not hurt or destroy on my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord. So the earth has changed. The earth itself has changed. the earth is filled with the knowledge. And this is not like knowledge in a scholarly sense. This is knowledge in the personal or relational relationals. This is God reconciled to creation. I see. Yes, Kenneth. Yeah, I got chills when you said that. I'd never really noticed that before. And part of the reason I got chills is rest is a major theme in a lot of these prophetic oracles that envision the end. The promised Sabbath rest returns, and that's part of Eden. That's part of Eden. Yes, David, and then Scott.
I was just thinking, first, the whole earth is full of the knowledge of the world. C.S. Lewis in his book, That Hideous String, discussion in there about evil not existing, but the idea is that if we're not filled with good, evil's not a presence, it's a lack of presence.
It's a privation. Yeah,
I think there's a similar idea.
that is the idea of evil as a privation is an idea that we should really reflect on. I found that it resonates with my atheist and agnostic students powerfully when you say to them truthfully, evil doesn't exist. Evil is just an absence or a privation of the good. That's the actual Christian view of evil. That we can talk about it existing and that be truthful, but technically speaking, evil depends upon the good for its existence. It doesn't have an existence of its own. It is nothing but the absence of the good. So you can know the truth of something without knowing the lie. You can know something to be true. A lie is nothing more than the privation of the truth. For the lie to exist, the truth must exist first. And this is actually an argument the Christians kind of semi-borrowed from some of the Greek philosophers, but it's important because the Greek philosophers reasoned their way to one good divine principle in the world. They reasoned they didn't think of the world as two equally balanced powers of good and evil. They reasoned there must be one divine principle that good is superior to evil. I say they, the Platonists did. There must be one good principle in the world that's superior in power to evil. That's the Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, became monotheists. And I think it's a rational kind of thought. What is cancer but the absence of a healthy functioning? It's of healthy functioning in a cell. What is rust? Rust isn't really a thing. It's the rusty hole in a car. We call it a thing, but it's not a thing. It's the absence of the good. When we say that evil's a privation, what we're saying is that God is greater than evil. Satan and God are not opposites.
And Isaiah is saying that if the earth is full of the Lord, there's no room.
To return to David's really excellent point, which I just glossed over. This is so if the earth is full of that which is good, there is no room for a privation of the good, to make David's really excellent point. Which was really over my head until you stated it as clearly as you could. One more oracle in Isaiah. Turn to the very end of Isaiah, and this is just so we can launch into the New Testament a little bit before we close tonight. I have a little bit of time here. Let's go to the final vision of the world as it might be. Isaiah 66, the final chapter, verses 22 and 23. And this isn't going to reveal much more than what we've read so far, but it gives us language for understanding some of the New Testament passages we're going to look at. Here, and I should say this too, before the New Testament came along, this was in many ways the narrative end of the Old Testament. Isaiah is not the last book, but Isaiah is looking as far into the distance as any prophet. And so it's not surprising that the early Christians looked to Isaiah above all else as the resource for its gospel. In fact, other Jewish groups did too. Verse 22. For as the new heavens and the new earth, this is God speaking. For as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make shall remain before me, says the Lord, so shall your descendants and your name remain. From new moon to new moon and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me. So what's pictured in these two short verses? And I always think of the series David led us in a few years ago on heaven. What's being pictured here? I'm more interested in the new heavens and the new earth language, but that Sabbath to Sabbath language, I think, is describing the perpetuity of what has been done. So from new moon to new moon, from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me. I do think, though, the transition to Sabbath is envisioning, the idea of Sabbath being the day of worship in particular. So this is a perpetuity of worship, a perpetuity of, but not just Jews, all flesh, all humans. What's meant by a new heavens and new earth? Yeah, back to what it was intended to be at the beginning. It's creation made new. It's the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is a vision of God remaking the heavens. It's not a replacement heaven and earth either. We know this because in the previous chapter, when he speaks of the new heavens and the new earth, he also talks about the people being made new, the new Jerusalem, the new people of God. That's not replacement people, that's the people being recreated, reformed. And if you all remember the series that David led a few years, I think it was David who, on heaven, this was a major theme from that series. This language in new heavens and new earth shows up in the New Testament. And I'd like to, in our remaining time, look at, if we have time anyways, some major voices of the New Testament that do the same thing Isaiah does. They envision the world as it will be. I want to look at Paul, Peter, John, and then Jesus himself. Okay? Let's turn to Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8. This is, the verses I want to read are verses 18 through 20. But if you kept reading, you would get to those groaning passages that David brought up at the very beginning of our time together. Verse 18. Now, in this passage, Paul is reflecting on our cruciform experience of identifying with Christ in his suffering and dying, so that we may also identify with him in his rising to newness of life, in his resurrection. And if we think of life in those terms, that to the extent that we suffer, to the extent we die, we are being joined to Christ if we do it faithfully. And to the extent that we already begin to walk in newness of life now, and to the extent that we one day will be resurrected, we are joining to Christ in his resurrection. If we think of our lived experience in those terms, then sufferings, though immense, though painful, aren't all that much. And that's the point that Paul's making here. He says in verse 18, I consider that the sufferings of this present time. Notice Paul's thinking of their sufferings, but they belong to this time now. Paul distinguished between the present evil age and the good age to come. Suffering belongs to this time now. There's already in his language an anticipation that one day sufferings will end. Anyways, I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. So here, Paul personifies creation. What's creation? It's everything God made. He personifies creation, expectantly waiting for the day when we are unveiled as the children of God. So creation's waiting for the end of history, the day of the Lord, when we are revealed as the children of God. Why? Why is creation expectantly waiting for this end of history? Notice what Paul says next. For the creation was subjected to futility. What do your translations say? They're subjected to frustration. The word there, any other words? Anybody have a different word there? The word there implies a state of frustration, but also a state of corruption, of futility. It's another way of talking about death. When was the world subjected to futility? Adam's sin. That's what Paul's talking about here. He's been talking about it in earlier chapters, chapter 5. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope, and here's the sentence I wanted to come to, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. That's the gospel for the creation itself. That's the good news for the physical cosmos. It's the same, just like you and I were in a state of captivity and we're set free into the freedom that God gives us. The creation itself will one day share in our freedom. The creation itself one day will be liberated or set free from bondage to decay. This is Isaianic language through and through. And it will come to be, the creation will be free from decay. This is Paul in one sentence reflecting what Isaiah says 1,000 times over. Very quickly, turn to Colossians 1. I want to quickly look at a passage. This is a beautiful hymn, a rhetorical hymn to Christ that Paul is writing in Colossians 1:15 through 20. If any of you are musicians, this would be a wonderful passage to set to music for us to sing. I'd like to read the final two verses, 19 and 20. And this is about Christ. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. And through him, God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things. All right, what does Paul mean when he uses the phrase, all things? He means all things. He means everything God made, all creation. It's tapon, it's all things. That is the phrase that many writers, Christian and Jewish, use for the whole creation. It's a common expression. So in Christ, God is reconciling the creation to himself. Whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of Christ. Notice the language of heaven and earth drawn from Isaiah. This is also a vision of the creation being made new. All right, that's Paul. We can look at other passages of Paul. Let's turn to Peter. I want to tackle a chapter that I think has been the source of some confusion, particularly in our fellowship in the churches of Christ. Although it wasn't, I think Alexander Campbell read this really well. 2 Peter chapter 3. So we're going to hear Peter's voice now. We've heard Paul. We'll hear from Peter. Now, what's going on in 2 Peter 3? Peter is saying there's going to come this future time when these false prophets come along, these scoffers, these false prophets, and they're going to say, there's no end of history. There's no judgment. Things are just going to go on as they always have. So these are Christians that are saying this, but they're kind of reflecting the view of the Sadducees, that there is no end to history, that creation will just go on indefinitely, and you die, it's over for you, and there's no judgment. And one of the things Peter says at the beginning of the chapter is these scoffers, they forget that God judged the world in the past, in the flood. And he says they forget that God destroyed the world by water. And reflecting on that past destruction by water, Peter then looks ahead to the end of history. And I'd like to pick up there. Let's start in verse 10. And he's going to describe now a future destruction of creation that's parallel to the Noah's destruction, the destruction by water. This is going to be a destruction by fire. And this is the image that I was raised with, and it is a biblical image. Let's read together. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. And then the heavens will pass away with a loud noise, and the elements will be dissolved with fire, and the earth and everything that is in it, that is done on it, will be, and there's a debate here whether the text reads disclosed, or do you have another word there? Exposed. Laid bare. It doesn't matter if it says laid bare in that particular word or not. There's clearly a destruction being described in the words that precede it, right? The earth, the heavens pass away. The earth, the elements will be dissolved with fire. Okay? If we stop there, it almost sounds like the earth and the heavens cease to exist, doesn't it? Keep reading. Since all these things are to be dissolved or destroyed in this way. By the way, the word that Peter uses there is the same word he used to describe the destruction by water earlier in the chapter. Since all these things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of persons ought you to be in leading lives of holiness and godliness, waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be set ablaze and dissolved, and the elements will melt with fire? If you stop there, it sounds like that's it for the earth, that's it for the heavens. But read the very next verse. But in accordance with his promise, God's promise, we wait for new heavens and a new earth where righteousness is at home. What promise is he talking about? The one we read at the end of Isaiah, where God says, I will make the heavens and the earth new. I will make a new heavens and a new earth. In fact, the image of fire as God's judgment of all creation also comes from Isaiah. And the image of fire destroying it's a purifying image. What gets destroyed are all the impure elements, all that is wrong. Just like when you take a blade and you put it in fire. And so what emerges on the other side is a heavens and earth that have been made new, a heavens and earth that do not have the impurities. And he used the word destroyed, yes, but it's not an annihilation sense. It's the same word he used to describe the destruction of the earth by water. What did Noah's flood do to creation? It destroyed, but in a renewing sense, right? It removed evil. And Peter's imagining the destruction by fire doing the same. The point is, we have Isaiah's vision influencing Paul. We also have it influencing Peter. A world where death has been removed. To use the biblical language, new heavens and new earth. I was raised with the view that the earth would be just annihilated by fire. That the earth would cease to exist forever. Like God had come up with a plan B, right? He intended creation to be good. He intended to be with us here in creation, but he changed his mind once he saw his back and just destroys the whole thing, and we go off to live with him in heaven forever. That was the narrative I was raised with. And that is a narrative that became popular in American preaching, especially in the 20th century, though there are precedents for it earlier. Honestly, that narrative reflects the influence of Platonic thought, which is not Christian, on our thinking. Plato sees the world, the physical world, as unredeemable, as bad, as something that God did not make. In fact, the world in Plato's thought is a prison, and we Westerners are deeply influenced by Jesus and Moses on the one hand and by Plato on the other. And we've imbibed some of our grandparents' Platonism when we think of the world as a prison that cannot be redeemed. Let's turn to John. Let's see John's vision. Revelation. Turn to Revelation chapter 21. Alexander Campbell, in his book, The Restoration of All Things, looked to this image in this chapter and taught at a time when many American Christians had lost sight of the notion. It's everywhere in the church fathers, it's everywhere in medieval Christianity, but modern Americans had lost sight of the vision of the new heavens and the new earth. Campbell did not. Anyways, I say that to say, in churches of Christ, we do have a history of being sensitive to this important teaching, that God made the earth and all that's in it. He called it good, and therefore he will redeem it. He will make it new. Revelation 21. This is part of John's seventh vision. There are seven visions, and they're all seven visions of the end. And this is the fullest one. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Notice, when he puts words to describe what he saw, he reaches for the language of Isaiah. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first earth and the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. If you stop there, that might seem like it's a replacement creation, but when we keep reading, you'll see that's not the case. Why would the sea not exist? This is poetic. The sea is an image of chaos. In Genesis, what you see in the creation account is the sea is chaotic. And what God does is he brings order to the sea. He divides land and sea. And when the Psalms write about this, they treat the sea as like a power that rises up and God puts it in its place. In John's final vision, this enemy, the sea, is not even existing. By the way, this is what's going on when Jesus rebukes the sea and calms the sea and stills the sea. It's him defeating chaos. Well, this is the final battle. And here, chaos, the sea is defeated. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem. Now, John has just described the holy city. This is the heavenly city of Jerusalem. This is where we get our language for heaven, right? Streets of gold, pearly gates. That comes from the very end right here in Revelation. He's just described that city. Now something happens to that heavenly city. I cannot help think of my grandmother, who always talked about that day. When I was young, she was very old, she constantly talked about her coming death and looked forward to it. And she said, I can't wait to see those streets of gold, those pearly gates. And that made a huge impression on me as a child. She was just utterly unafraid of death, just unafraid. Well, she was drawing the language of the city that John describes, this unimaginable city that's beautiful, the heavenly city. It's in heaven with God. But John describes something happening to that city. This is what we call heaven. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them." Tell me if y'all recognize this language. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. That was from Isaiah 25. Death will be no more. A loose summary of Isaiah 25. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. And the one who was seated on the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." So that verse makes clear the creation is being renewed. What happens to, two questions. In John's vision, as we just read it, what happens to the holy city? I'll start with that. What happens to the holy city? It comes down. Heaven comes to earth. So God is in heaven. The souls of the saints, Revelation 6, are in heaven, those who've been martyred. But those souls in heaven are still awaiting the end in Revelation 6. They're crying, "How long, O Lord, for you avenge our blood?" This is the end. Heaven, that beautiful hymn, "This is our Father's world," it ends with this vision. "Till heaven and earth be one." Those are the final lines of the hymn. In some of our songbooks, we changed those words, got rid of them. I don't know what's in our songbook. I should have asked before. Should have looked before I brought it up. Heaven comes down. Okay, and what happens to God in this vision? Notice the movement at the end of history is God and heaven coming here. God and heaven coming here. God is coming to make his home among mortals. And this is what God intended to do from the beginning. He intended to live in this good creation. And this is unimaginable. What does a world look like that's one with heaven, that's one with God? All we have are these prophetic, dim, but poetic and beautiful glimpses. But this is the world we hope for. A world where God is present. And it's a reversal of Eden, isn't it? We're no longer separated from God. Now God is here. The nations are no longer warring each other. They are gathered together. We no longer individually die, and we no longer have grief. Tears have been wiped away. In this same vision, he pictures the tree of life appearing again and producing a crop every month. So once again, this is Eden. We now are free to eat from the tree of life from which we were originally expelled. We, humanity, is. We can close with the words of Jesus, but you know the words. I'll start with the Beatitudes, a verse I never understood growing up because I was raised with this Platonic notion that the earth is unredeemable, the earth is bad, it can't be saved. What does Jesus say? "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." This is Jesus' beautiful vision of the first will be last and the last will be first. When Mary learns she has that child within her, she's a poor lady, and she says, God's going to bring the wealthy and the powerful down and lift the humble up, the hungry up. This is a vision of the world being turned upside down, and who receives creation itself, everything, as an inheritance from God? The meek. And I'll close with the Lord's Prayer. I've talked about the Lord's Prayer before as poetry. I think, having talked about it for several years, I think one of the most important things I want to say about the Lord's Prayer is we punctuate it wrong. So I'm going to recite the first half of the Lord's Prayer. Y'all hear the punctuation with me. Our Father who art in heaven, comma, hallowed be thy name, comma, or period. Thy kingdom come, we put a comma or a period there, or a semicolon. And then the first half ends with a long petition. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's how we punctuate it. When you hear it that way, it sounds like on earth as it is in heaven only goes with thy will be done, right? Thy will be done. So all we're really playing as far as the earth is concerned, all we're playing is for the will to be done on earth. In the Greek, it's actually poetry. And on earth as it is in heaven actually modifies all three petitions in the Greek. So it's a prayer for the earth, the Lord's Prayer is. So if I were to cite it kind of reflecting the poetry and the structure and the punctuation of the Greek, I would do something like, Our Father in the heavens, the name that is yours, let it be sung or hallowed. The reign, the kingdom, the reign that is yours, let it become. The aim that is yours, or the will that is yours, let it be done. You hear all three of those petitions rhyme? The name that is yours, let it be sung. The reign that is yours, let it become. The aim that is yours, let it be done. They rhyme in Greek. And then it ends with, as in the heavens, it's flipped around, as in the heavens, so too on earth, period. The final word of that petition is the earth. So Jesus is teaching us to pray for the earth. He's teaching us to pray that three things happen on it. God's name is finally hallowed here. As in heaven, it's finally hallowed and worshiped here. His reign, his kingdom, this is the thing that Jesus preached. And what did he say about the kingdom? It's coming. The kingdom has finally come here. As in heavens, so also on earth. And God's will is finally being done. Why? Because his kingdom has come. And then the second half of the petition is also a vision of what the earth will look like. Bread, forgiveness of debts, to quote Matthew, deliverance. That's Jubilee. That's Jubilee. It's what the earth looks like in a Jubilee year, where everybody has bread, all debts, moral or economic, are forgiven, and we are finally delivered from, and the Lord's Prayer names the power not death, it names the power evil. So Jesus gave that prayer to his disciples. He said, pray this. It shows you how central Isaiah's hope of a renewed earth was to Jesus' preaching of the coming kingdom. And I think these things are important to say because we have good news not just for the individual sinner, but we have good news for all that's wrong with the world. All that's wrong. War, famine, individual relationships falling apart, babies dying. All of this is death, and our good news is we are already experiencing the inbreaking of renewing life among us. And for that reason, we believe that what God has already started to do among us, he will one day bring to its conclusion. I think I'll end right there. Thank you all very much.